Welcome to Restaurant Deal Making Exposed, the only show that equips you with everything you need to know about restaurant transactions. In this show, we tell you all about how to make the sale or purchase of your restaurant not just possible, but successful. Now here are your hosts, ex-restaurateurs and seasoned brokers, Patrick Toda and Andy Mirabel.
Welcome, everybody. We are here today with Sally Rowshan, and we're calling this episode Escrow to the Rescue. Sally Rowshan is the founder and president of Secured Trust Escrow, an independent and highly regarded escrow company based in Torrance, California. With years of experience in real estate and financial services sector, Sally has built a reputation for handling complex and high-value transactions with precision and expertise. At Secured Trust Escrow, she specializes in business, sale escrows, holding escrows, and managing intricate deals for attorneys, receivers, judges, and other fiduciaries. Her deep understanding of the nuances involved in the transactions makes her an invaluable resource for clients in a variety of industries, including restaurant and bar transactions. Sally's legal career began at Georgetown University Law Center, where she honed her skills and passion for real estate and title law. On a personal note, I'm a huge Georgetown basketball fan myself, and I have to say her alma mater has a fantastic tradition. After earning her law degree, Sally made the bold decision to move to California, and in 2010 founded Secured Trust Escrow, leveraging her years of experience to build a business that thrives on trust, integrity, and client success. I've had the pleasure of working with Sally and her team at Secured Trust Escrow for the past 6 to 8 months, and I can confidently say that they've been instrumental in helping me navigate and close escrow smoothly with my clients. Whether it's a straightforward transaction or something a bit more complex, Sally and her team's attention to detail and commitment to her clients have constantly impressed me. Outside of work, Sally is a big fan of Los Angeles' vibrant food scene. I've heard she loves exploring the city's best restaurants, so I'm hoping she'll share a few of her favorite spots today. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome, Sally. We better start with hearing about a couple of your recommendations for restaurants in LA.
Oh my gosh, that's a very long list.
I bet.
I'm a big foodie. Fortunately, I can still fit into my clothes, but if you look at my credit cards, you would think I'm about 800 pounds.
It's a great scene down there. I lived and worked in Los Angeles during college, after college, which was decades ago, but I worked in restaurants from the South Bay, Manhattan Beach, and Hollywood, West Hollywood, all around. So there's never a shortage of new things to try and fantastic quality, concepts in restaurants. So,
yeah.
I wanted to kind of start out by, first of all, thanking you for joining us. The discussion about escrow comes up over and over again with clients. And oftentimes, sometimes clients are wanting to save a buck. Maybe they think they can do things on their own. And we really wholeheartedly urge them not to do that. And we urge the importance of holding escrow for so many reasons that protect the buyer and seller, especially the seller. So I guess I would like to get a better understanding of what inspired you to take your legal experience and move into opening and owning and operating your own escrow business?
I get asked that question a lot because in California, running an escrow company or running an escrow doesn't require a law degree. But I graduated Georgetown Law in 2001, and I started, during law school, I worked for a title company, a very large title company. And right after law school, I decided to open up my own title company. We called it an underwritten title company, because we had a big agency like First American in Chicago. That was our principal. We were agents for them. And that's very customary on the East Coast that attorneys run title companies and have title offices. So when you buy and sell a house or a business, you go sit at a table and there's an attorney that goes through all the paperwork for you as a neutral third party. In 2010, I missed home and I got a really nice offer to purchase the company that I had. And I decided to take that offer and I sold the company, moved to California, and realized that everything's done completely different here. Attorneys don't run title companies. Attorneys don't run escrow companies. And there was a business broker that actually presented to me an escrow company in Beverly Hills. That was a very reputable escrow company. They did holdings, they did business sales. And I decided to purchase it. And from there, I kind of learned how California does escrow.
That's fantastic. We can see that you comment on the differences and nuances of operating an escrow company in California. And for those of you who don't live in California, many things are done here differently on many levels. So it is a complicated state to work in. It's a state I love, but yeah, there's definitely some nuances, and I'm glad you pointed that out about
Yeah.
escrow as well. You work on a variety of different business escrows and transactions. What makes, let's just stick with the word restaurant, what makes restaurants more challenging than the next business escrow?
Oh my gosh. Restaurants are challenging because of two reasons. And they have to do with two government agencies in the state of California, ABC and CDTFA. That's really what makes restaurants challenging. I would say ABC is even a little more complicated than CDTFA because somebody could buy a restaurant, for $1 million and value the liquor license at only, let's say, 100,000, and 900,000 is everything else. But the entire transaction is held up because ABC is taking their time to issue the license.
Yeah.
So that's really challenging, is just waiting for a lot of the ABC offices to, give the green light to close the escrow. And
doesn't that open the window, Patrick, for you to plug what we do as agents and handle the ABC transaction from start to finish for our clients?
The big question I have there has always been, if you have the ability to use a temporary permit, why can't we close escrow either on a second escrow for the ABC license, or, while that's being finished up, why can't we just be on a temporary license and then close escrow? I mean, it's there for us to be able to do it. And I've always been like, why does it have to be so difficult?
We can point out too that we used to have much more flexibility in holding two escrows, one for the license and one for the assets in California. And it seems like the door is just closed on that almost across the board. And
Yeah.
you correct me if I'm wrong, Sally, but you can, respond to that.
The door is closed across the board, and ABC really frowns down on that. And it would make life a lot easier if they were separate, but ABC wants to have a clear idea of the entire picture of the transaction. So how to separate it is a whole separate topic that we could probably go into for like another hour. But in a nutshell, it shouldn't be separated. It should technically be all one. And then we are at the mercy of the ABC office. There are certain things everybody can do to make it faster. One is to have all the applications in place early, have a clear communication with ABC, be proactive buyer and seller and getting the things done and completed for them. There are things that can be done, but sometimes a lot of buyers or sellers think, well, I have a business broker and I'm paying for escrow. Why do I have to fill out all these forms? Yeah. And it's really hard to explain to them that the ABC applications, they're not necessarily part of the business broker's job to complete for you. They're definitely not part of the escrow company's job to complete for you. There's some legwork that any buyer or seller in the state of California has to do to both buy and sell. That whole conversation really comes into play a lot with the CDTFA, where sellers come to us and say, I didn't have to do this when I bought the business, when I bought this restaurant. Why are you guys making me do all this paperwork for the CDTFA? And they get really upset because the expectations weren't really clarified for them as to what the process is for them to sell a business in California.
Sally, let me ask you a question. When the CDTFA, and for everybody that's listening, the CDTFA is the organization that we pay sales tax to for California. Did anything change when it used to be the BOE, the Board of Equalization, versus when it changed to CDTFA? Were things easier then or harder then? What big difference has there been since they added this new kind of like umbrella?
I don't really think there has been much of a difference other than they changed the name. It's like for us, our regulators was called DBO, and now it's DSPI. But at the end of the day, what I can tell you is CDTFA has legally 60 days from the time that the request is made to give a clearance, and 60 days from when they receive a complete application to give you a clearance, to give a buyer's release of liability. So if the file is given to them complete, which means the escrow instructions, the allocation, and whatever else they're looking for, then they have 60 days to issue a clearance.
These are 60 days that they could hold your 100% of the consideration or 100% of purchase price beyond the close of escrow. This is one of the big problems for sellers.
Well, CDTFA doesn't necessarily say you have to hold 100%. Once in a while, they'll send us a letter saying we're holding 100%. It's not that they say we're holding the buyer liable for 100% of the sales price. And they do that as a hold to say, hey, don't even think about releasing $1 because we've got work to do here. But legally, escrow companies should not really release 100% of the proceeds or any of the seller's proceeds until the CDTFA clearance has been issued. And as a practical matter, escrow companies don't always do that because our job is to follow instructions. And when the buyer and seller are calling and the broker is calling and saying, this is not fair, you can't hold $1 million because, we don't have a clearance, that's going to cause undue harm to the seller. And then they say, just hold 300,000 for a few weeks until we get this clearance. Our job is to follow instructions. But technically, escrow companies should not release any of the money until the CDTFA release of buyer's liability is in their hand.
Let me ask you a question. So why is it, if this is an asset sale and a buyer is purchasing the assets and not the liability, then why is it if we were to close escrow without the clearance of the CDTFA, why is it that they get held responsible if in the future the seller didn't pay their sales tax? How is that even like a thing, if you can explain that?
That is such a good question. And that is something that a lot of people think, that if you're buying the assets, if you're buying the machinery of a real restaurant or the furniture, fixture, and equipment of a restaurant, I'm only buying the asset. I don't have any liability. That's not how it works in California. That's how I learned how to do business sales, because I bought the assets of this escrow company. I bought the file. I took over 2 employees. I moved it to a whole different geographical location, and yet I still got letters saying you're a successor in interest. And so when you talk about a restaurant, we'll hold the buyer responsible for any unpaid sales taxes, even on an asset sale, because they're buying the equipment, they're buying the license. And so the buyer of a restaurant, could go into escrow as an asset sale thinking, well, I'm not, I'm safe, but they're really not. Because once they go and apply for their own seller's permit in that location, then the CDTFA knows that they're a successor. And that's what we get, is called a release of buyer's liability. We get that on asset sale because they could technically go and put the sales taxes on the new buyer as a successor.
And one of the worst escrows I ever did was early on in my career here as a business broker. And I learned that one the hard way. I was doing an escrow, and I learned during the escrow that the seller had purchased the business outside of escrow from the person he bought the business from. And when we were in escrow, and Andy, I was using the escrow service that you use right now, they informed me that basically the CDTFA came to them. They owed, that the prior seller had owed $300,000 in sales tax. And also there was some institutional loan type liens on the business. And he didn't even know. And he didn't know any of this. And so we had to negotiate with the institutions to get those UCC ones removed. But more over the CDTFA was, we eventually got them to remove that or give us clearance, but it was this chaotic moment of I thought this guy was going to owe a bunch of money that he wasn't even responsible for.
I felt like we were going to go on a tangent on CDTFA, and I actually had typed up 3 different scenarios that I want to bounce off Sally.
The CDTFA is a whole episode.
It's all pivoted. We definitely should be talking about more surface level stuff of why buyers and sellers use escrow and to protect themselves, but this is a big part of it. Okay, so I am almost exclusively getting 100% hold of funds in escrow requests from the CDTFA for almost every one of my deals up here in Northern California in the Bay Area.
You get that letter that says, yeah, we have a lien on the entire sales.
Yes. So this is even if my sellers were in good standing, never delinquent, don't owe anything, they still they're slapping this 100% hold on funds in escrow until the account is closed out, final forms are filled out, and the final return is made and paid. So Let me use an example. And these are more associated with asset sales and distressed businesses. So I'm going to speak slowly because it gets a little long-winded. Example one that I went through something very similar, and I'm going to use really round numbers here. A business is in contract to sell for $100,000. The buyer wants to buy the concept and does not want the business to close down or alter their day-to-day operations prior to the close of escrow and their pending takeover. So we have $100,000 purchase price. Let's say the seller has $80,000 in debts, whether that be EIDL loan, SBA, whatever it is. That leaves roughly $20,000 left in escrow for fees, commissions, and other related costs. So the escrow is essentially run dry, right? All those funds are accounted for. Then the CDTFA puts 100% hold of funds in escrow, 100% hold of purchase price, which is $100,000. If all of these funds are allotted to other liens and things, they have asked my buyers, and escrow has asked for the seller to infuse money into escrow in order for them to, until they can close their account, pay their final return, and have that hold removed. My sellers who are distressed often don't have $80,000 lying around. They can't do this. And it's tanked a couple deals, and it's also complicated them severely. That's the most complicated situation one. I'll let you respond to it because I have situation 2 and 3, which are way easier, by the way.
Oh, okay. So I could say, thankfully, I've gotten many of those where it's a short escrow, meaning the closing purchase price doesn't cover all the debt. Thankfully, the sellers I've worked with have all had the cash to close it. But what I can tell you is there's a whole statutory law order of distribution in that event that the seller doesn't have the money, that certain creditors get paid first, taxes, federal taxes, state taxes, and then it goes down. I don't have it memorized off the top of my head,
Sure.
but it exists. And there's some procedures you have to follow. You have to send a letter to all the creditors, letting them know that, this is happening and there isn't funds to close. There's a possibility the agent doesn't get paid. There's a possibility the escrow agent doesn't get paid. But if you have, in fact, a short escrow, there's some statutory requirements you have to follow with respect to payment. So I would like to say, be careful taking those, because legally you may work and not get paid, just like escrow may work and not get paid. So, when somebody's listing a house, maybe they do comps to see what it could actually sell for, and they get an estimated closing statement from us that shows, payoffs and commissions and what's left for the seller. When you're dealing with distressed businesses, and sometimes the sellers don't even tell you, they're like, we're paying for the EIDL loan. Why should I even disclose it? I'm going to keep paying for it. You're messing around with U.S. government money.
I've learned, disclose as much as I know from my past experiences with sellers of distressed businesses, especially in regards to this. And do they have extra cash reserves to, handle this situation if it comes up? My situation 2 is very much more simple. The same situation as above, but buyer and seller have agreed on the dreaded early possession, which Patrick and I are going to say, pump the brakes, a lot of risk here. But let's just say that's the way around this. If the buyer takes early possession before close of escrow, then the seller has time before the close of escrow to file their final return, file their closeout with the CDTFA, and then in essence, the hold will not come into play where they'll have to infuse money into escrow. Is that one option that you've seen taken?
Yeah. So early possession is an interesting thing because it brings to light what the definition of the closed escrow means. A lot of people think that the buyer takes possession of the business. It means escrow is closed and we're allowed to pay the commissions and we're allowed to do X, Y, Z. So no, early possession is not. Escrow is considered closed when we have all the releases, releasing buyer's liability. So that's on the legal side. Legally, yes, you do that. But on the practical side, there's a seller that is in trouble and they need a buyer with energy, with whatever it is that they have to jump in and save the business with money, with ideas. And so you can't really stop that from happening because, I don't have my releases. Like they want to salvage this business. The buyer wants to go in and they want to take over. So what happens a lot of times with early possession is when there's an ABC, when the temporary license is issued, the buyer goes in and takes over and we continue to hold the proceeds. And we continue to work with the seller to get buyer's release of liability, and life goes on, right? This business is safe, the buyer is happy, the seller is happy. But you also always run the risk that this buyer now has taken over the business, is
They
there.
don't own the business technically. They don't own the assets technically, and they could run it into the ground.
They could say, oh my God, this is not really what I thought it was. And all of a sudden they're either renegotiating or they're going to say, nope, we're canceling escrow. So
it's a whole nother episode.
No, thankfully, no, but
it has happened to me, and it's my worst transaction in my whole career. The buyer went in an early possession, dug in, ran the business in the ground. All the employees left. I mean, it was a nightmare. And this is a whole nother episode because we want to protect our clients from making decisions that sound good at face value for now, but really could have a lot of detrimental effects down the road. I guess my conclusion on my situation 3 is this, Sally, is if the business is distressed and the buyer is not taking over the concept and carrying on from there, they plan to do remodel or whatever it is, and the seller is in a situation where they're out of funds, they can't put funds in to satisfy the CDTFA hold of funds because of other debts and stuff and claims into escrow. I have used the tactic to have them shut down about a month before our predicted close of escrow so they can do all their closeouts, because it's not going to impact the buyer at that point because they're going to come in and remodel or whatever. That seems like the safest way for me in these situations.
Well, I mean, I think each business situation is different. You know, some sellers can't just shut down. I think you have to, as a business broker, you really have to talk to your client and see what their needs are and decide which route is route 1, 2, or 3 best for them. I haven't seen that often where they fully shut it down. And then what I've seen most of the time is the seller, for whatever reason, wants to leave and exit. And there's a buyer that's ready to jump in. And they do trust each other. They trust the broker, and they go in and they take over. That's really what I've seen most of the time.
All right, Patrick, I'm zipping my lip on this subject. I'm turning over the next questions to you.
So Sally, tell us maybe like your most memorable escrow, like the most challenging one. Hopefully it's not one of my deals.
Oh gosh. I would say, it's definitely not one of your deals. We had a gas station a couple of years ago. The buyer and seller seemed to be friends or family, and the business broker was part of their group, friends, family, and the lender was also friends and family. And it was like a $2 million sale. 900,000 of it was this gas station and mini mart, and the rest was real property. And they called me and said, and we had like a $1.5 million proceeds, $1.7 million, something like that, to send to the seller proceeds. They called me and said, we're all friends, we're all family. Just hold $50,000 for CDTFA and release everything else to the seller. And the buyer, I picked up the phone, I explained all this to the buyer, and I told the agent, I don't feel comfortable with $50,000. This is a $900,000 business deal. And she said, don't worry, we're all friends. You need to follow. And she actually argued with me and said, you need to, step back, stop telling us what to do. So I wrote my instructions that I'm indemnifying ourselves for anything that could possibly go wrong. And we're following your instructions. Buyer, you know what you're doing. Seller, you know what you're doing. And we released the fund. We later found out that the CDTFA is actually owed. We got a letter from the CDTFA that there's like a $200,000 outstanding sales tax, which is going to stick to the buyer now. And a bunch of other things that, we found out after the close of escrow. And we were only holding $50,000. And all of a sudden, these two guys are not friends anymore, So I tried my best to navigate and explain to them everything, and it wasn't working. So I had to interplead the $50,000 to the court. So that was a really tough one. And so from that, we learned that we really try. We argue when people ask us to release 100,000. And if they push and push, we just really protect ourselves, indemnify ourselves, and a lot of times pick up the phone and explain to the buyer what all this means for this buyer. And almost always the buyer tells us, don't worry about it. We're good.
Yeah.
So
boy, that sounds very challenging, especially when you're dealing with people, all the buddy handshake stuff that we know each other, we trust each other. Those seem to be the ones that always crumble the fastest for some reason. Because we dove so quickly into some of the major nuances of escrows in California and the CDTFA so wholeheartedly, could you, in a few sentences, really let our listeners know why holding escrow is so vital to protect both parties in the transfer of a business, property, or assets?
Maybe touch on like the bulk sale.
Well, escrow is really important for the buyer to protect them against any potential like successor liability that they may have. We get a clearance from CDTFA. We check unpaid sales taxes. We check for any payroll taxes that may be due. And a lot of businesses, it's not intentional. ADP sometimes messes up. I mean, your payroll service provider messes up. So we get clearances from EDD, franchise tax. What we do is search for any liens out there for the buyer. It has a lot of benefits. And then for the seller, it's important because you want to make sure the buyer actually has good funds. And escrow is a third party that's holding this money to make sure that the seller actually gets paid. How else are they going to know that there's really this cash available to them if things go south?
Okay. Well, any other topics you think we should dive into today? I feel like this is one of those ones that we could probably have broken up and had 4 episodes on, because of all the dealings and challenges. But I personally want to say thank you, Sally. You've been a part of our brokerage forums and been very supportive on what you guys do, why you do it, and definitely showed how proficient you are and your strong background. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We touched a little bit on restaurants, and I'm going to plug my friend's restaurant in Hollywood. You need to go try out Oste, OSTE. And
where is it? In Hollywood?
Yeah, it's in West Hollywood. He used to be a Bay Area friend of mine who ran all the best Italian spots here, and now he's down there. So there's a rec for you, okay?
Yeah, thank you. I love that area. That's really where we do most of our dining is that,
right.
West LA.
Good. Anything else, Patrick, to add?
I think that's it. I think we're good here on this episode. I do want to ask Sally what her most memorable dining experience was.
My gosh. In California?
Anywhere. We've talked internationally with our class. It doesn't matter. It could be in your grandma's kitchen.
I have a clear favorite that is, for me, is worth flying to. So I went to a Michelin star restaurant in Lisbon, Portugal called El Cante. And I've never in my life experienced that where it's a 4 or 5 hour, it's like a food show. I mean, the presentation, the art, the skill. And that was one of the most incredible food experiences of my life. It's worth the flight.
Top of my list is traveling to Portugal soon for sure. So I appreciate that. Well, thanks again. We want to let our listeners know to look forward to some really exciting new guests and informative episodes coming up. Sally's talking about dining experiences, and we're going to have Melissa Chow, a very renowned pastry chef in San Francisco for Mr. Ju's, a Michelin star restaurant, and so on one of our upcoming episodes. And we'll look forward to pack it in with good topics and good guests like Sally. So thanks again, Sally.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to worry about missing an episode, you can follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found today's episode interesting or useful, please share it with someone you think would benefit and consider leaving a rating and review.
Reviews help restaurant owners or buyers just like you discover this podcast and benefit from the important topics covered in the episodes. Your opinion matters to us as a listener, so feel free to leave topic suggestions and feedback for us, as we will use these to tailor the episodes to you and help you get the most out of listening.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. If you're considering selling your business and would like a free consultation, reach out to Patrick and Andy at therestaurantsalesbroker.com or visit www.therestaurantsalesbroker.com to learn more.